The snow stretched endlessly across the slopes of the Ural Mountains, a pale, silent desert where the wind spoke more than the travelers dared to. The group of 9 students and their seasoned leader, Igor Dyatlov, trudged through the biting cold, each breath forming a fragile cloud that vanished into the night. Their camp was a humble scatter of canvas and rope on the edge of a slope near Kolat Shachel Mountain of the Dead, as the local Manzi people named it. Few places bore a name so heavy, and yet the students treated it with an air of challenge, as if daring the land to bend beneath their boots. Inside the tent, their laughter was muffled by the storm outside. They wrote notes, shared bread, hardened by frost, and hummed songs to keep the night from swallowing them whole. Yet unease lingered, an invisible hand brushing the back of their necks when silence fell too long. Beyond the thin tent walls, the forest whispered. Some swore they heard movement, soft steps pressing into snow circling. A distant low moan of the wind carried tones that didn't belong to the storm at all. Lyudmila, the keen-eyed member of the group, scribbled in her journal that night. Her pencil trembled against the page as she recorded something odd, faint lights above the ridge, shifting like pale orbs, neither star nor flame. She told no one, afraid of spoiling the fragile chair, but her gaze lingered on the canvas flap long after the others had drifted to uneasy sleep. The night deepened. Within their fragile shelter, warmth clung stubbornly to their bodies. Yet something outside pressed closer, heavy, suffocating, as if the mountain itself leaned down to listen. Rustling grew more pronounced, muffled through the howling blizzard. At first, the group convinced themselves it was nothing more than wind teasing the snow, but gradually it changed footsteps, deliberate and slow pacing around their tent. Zinaida stirred, whispering Igor's name, but he silenced her with a raised hand. They all froze, ears straining against the muffled roars of the storm. Then, sharp against the howl, came a sound no storm could mimic, the faint tearing of fabric like nails dragging across canvas. Panic spread in silence, their eyes catching each other's in the flicker of a lantern's glow. A sudden weight pressed against the tent wall, collapsing the fabric inward, as though something leaned upon it with immense force. The lantern quivered, shadows stretching unnaturally long across their frightened faces. The air thickened with dread. Then came a noise so primal, it hollowed their chests, a guttural roar, deep and resonant, echoing against the valley walls before fading into the night. Igor's voice, low and steady, cut through their terror. "Get out," he whispered, not in command, but in warning. The tent became frantic, motion knives, slashing canvas, boots stamping into snow, desperate hands pulling one another into the night. The storm consumed them, instantly a chaos of ice and wind. Their shelter collapsed behind them, swallowed by the dark. They staggered into the blizzard, their bodies exposed, some without coats, some without shoes, driven only by a primal need to flee what still lingered near the camp. Behind them, through the whirling snow, faint shapes moved, tall, distorted figures, shifting just beyond sight. The storm hid them, yet their presence pressed in heavy and unrelenting, as though the mountain itself had birthed something old and hungry. The group fled toward the tree line, hearts pounding, with the certainty that the night was no longer empty. The forest swallowed them whole, its black branches stretching like ribs above the drifting snow. The storm dimmed under the canopy, but it was no comfort. Here the silence pressed closer, heavy with the scent of pine and something metallic, like rusted iron carried in the wind. Breathless and trembling, the group huddled near the base of an old cedar tree. Their faces were pale, illuminated only by the faint glow of snow reflecting the hidden moon. Yuri Doroshenko, shivering violently, began gathering twigs with raw hands. "Fire," he muttered, his voice broken by the cold. Sparks struggled to catch against the bitter wind, but soon a weak flame shivered to life, offering the group a fragile island of light. They pressed close eyes, darting into the woods, listening for what had driven them out into the night. Far beyond the trees, the storm roared as though mocking them. Between gusts, faint noises slipped through snapping branches, footsteps too deliberate to be their own. Lyudmila clutched her knees, rocking slightly, whispering words of a prayer half remembered from childhood. Her eyes kept lifting upward toward the higher ridges where faint blue orbs of light still pulsed against the horizon. No one else spoke of them, yet she knew they all saw. Igor's jaw was clenched tight as he scanned their faces. He tried to reassure them, but even he could not ignore the strangeness of their flight. Why had he, so rational and steadfast, ordered them to slash open the tent? What had possessed him in that instant? Fear, instinct, or something pressing against his mind that wasn't his own? The fire snapped, casting sparks into the black. For a moment, their shadows stretched unnaturally far across the snow, bending and twisting as though the flames themselves recoiled. Zenaida gasped softly. She had seen something move beyond the firelight, tall, misshapen, half-hidden, behind a veil of snow. It stood too still, watching. No one spoke. They did not need to. The knowledge sank into each of them at once. They were not alone. Time bled slowly. The cold chewed their skin, their clothes stiffening with frost. One by one, exhaustion bent their bodies. Some staggered further into the woods, seeking shelter, while others remained at the cedar, clinging to the dying fire. And always, those pale orbs burned faintly in the distance, like eyes upon the ridge. Later, Lyudmila would remember the sound, a high, unnatural hum that seemed to rise from the snow itself, vibrating in her bones. It grew louder until the forest itself seemed to tremble. The group clutched at each other, eyes wide with a terror too vast to speak. Then the humming stopped, swallowed in a silence more dreadful than noise. Above them, between the dark limbs of the cedar, the sky seemed to ripple. For an instant, the stars themselves flickered, bent out of shape, as though something massive and unseen moved across the heavens. The mountain groaned, a low, resonant shift beneath their feet. Snow slid softly from the branches, and with it, a realization more chilling than the storm itself. Whatever haunted the slopes of Kolatshakal was not bound to flesh and bone. It was older, buried deep within the mountain, and it had stirred. The fire collapsed into embers. Darkness closed around them, and in that silence, broken only by the hiss of falling snow, the group understood the cruel weight of their fate. The mountain was listening, and it had chosen them. Story 2: The Hinterkaifeck Murders, 1922, Germany. Snow blanketed the Bavarian countryside in a quiet hush, muffling sound and softening every outline. The Hinterkaifeck farm stood alone at the edge of a forest, its timbered walls dark against the pale white fields. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, giving the illusion of peace, though unease had been stirring there for days. Andreas Gruber, The stern patriarch had spoken of strange footprints in the snow prints that began at the forest's edge and led directly to the house, but none that returned. He told his wife Cecilia in a voice lowered with suspicion, though she scoffed at his worry. Yet each night, the creak of boards above their heads suggested someone unseen shifting in the attic. The sounds were faint, often dismissed as the wind gnawing at the roof beams, but they had grown more deliberate, as though someone paced slowly in the shadows overhead. Young Cecilia, their granddaughter, awoke in the nights with a terror she could not name. She whispered of whispers themselves, low murmurs that seemed to seep from the walls. No one believed her, though Victoria, her mother, sometimes found herself listening in the stillness and hearing something too, as though voices tangled in the dark rafters, waiting. That March evening, the lamps burned low shadows stretching tall across the farmhouse walls. The livestock shifted restlessly in the barn hooves clattering against frozen ground. Andreas, restless himself, stepped outside with a lantern. The cold stung his cheeks and the silence pressed close. Beyond the halo of light, the snowfields stretched empty, yet he felt the distinct prickle of eyes upon him. Turning sharply, he saw nothing but skeletal trees swaying at the forest's edge. When he returned inside, the air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves breathed with him. The family gathered close, huddled around the stove's dim glow. Victoria hummed softly to her daughter, though her gaze kept flicking to the ceiling. The muffled creak came again. Slow, deliberate steps above. The sound was too heavy for a rat, too measured for the shifting timbers. Andreas rose, jaw set, and reached for the lantern again, muttering of finally settling the matter. But before he could climb the narrow ladder to the attic, a sound cut through the night, distant at first, then nearer. A soft dragging across the snow outside, like something being pulled toward the barn. The animals stirred violently, their cries sharp panicked. The family froze, listening as the door hinges of the barn groaned. Then silence fell again, thicker than before, as though the very air was holding its breath. The lantern flame flickered wildly in Andreas's hand. The wind did not move yet. The shadows stretched, bending unnaturally across the wooden walls, as though something unseen had entered with the night itself. Andreas stepped into the barn-first lantern, raised high, its pale glow trembling against the beams above. The cattle shifted nervously, their eyes wide and glassy nostrils flaring as if scenting something foreign. The hay lay scattered, trampled in restless panic. Somewhere in the rafters, a faint thud echoed, too heavy, too purposeful to be dismissed as settling wood. Behind him, Victoria clutched young Cecilia's hand tightly, her breath misting in the cold air. "Stay close," she whispered, though the girl's small body was rigid, every muscle straining, as though she wished to flee. Cecilia's eyes darted to the corners of the barn, wide and unblinking. "It's here," she murmured, voice thin as thread. "It's watching us." The lantern cast long shadows across the walls, but among them, something shifted, a darker form breaking from the black. Andreas turned sharply, yet the shape was gone, swallowed into the rafters. The silence pressed down harder, thick and unnatural, as if the barn itself held its breath. Then came a sound that froze them all, a slow, dragging wood against wood from somewhere above. Andreas barked for the others to stay, but his voice cracked in the middle, betraying the fear Even he could not hide. He climbed the ladder toward the loft, each rung groaning beneath his weight. The lantern shook in his grip, its light painting fragments of hay rope and shadow. Halfway up, he paused, listening. The sound had stopped, replaced by something quieter breathing. Deep, measured, and far too close. He lifted the lantern, casting its glow into the loft. Empty. Only straw and tools dust hanging in the air like smoke. Yet the breath continued steady and slow surrounding him, pressing from all sides, though no figure stood within sight. His throat tightened as the lantern's flame sputtered, nearly extinguished by an unseen draft. Down below, Victoria felt the urge to flee, rising like a tide, but her father's stained figure kept her rooted. The barn seemed alive, its timbers groaning, animals stamping in panic. Young Cecilia whimpered, hiding her face, and in that moment, Victoria realized she too could hear it, the breathing heavy and patient drifting down from the dark. The lantern above flared once more before something unseen struck it. The glass shattered, spilling fire into the hay. Andrea shouted, his cry cut short with a sickening crack that echoed through the rafters. Victoria screamed his name, but the sound was swallowed in chaos. Cattle bellowing, hooves pounding, the sharp hiss of flames catching dry straw. In the confusion, shadows moved. Too many, too fast. They slipped between the beams' figures, without faces, long and thin, stretching unnaturally, as though the fire itself gave them form. They poured from the loft like smoke, descending soundlessly into the barn. The family stumbled backward into the night air, but the cold offered no refuge. Above the roofline, the forest loomed dark and endless, its branches swaying though the wind lay still. From that black wall of trees, faint lights shimmered, cold spectral glows that pulsed in rhythm, drawing nearer. Victoria clutched her daughter close, her heart hammering with the dreadful certainty that they had never been alone. Something had lingered in their walls, watched from the rafters, breathed their air. Now it had stepped into the open. The night on Hinterkaifeck farm swallowed their cries, leaving only the hiss of fire and the whisper of unseen feet moving through the snow, circling closer with every breath. Story 3. The Villisca Axe Murders. 9/12, Iowa, USA. The summer night in Villisca was warm and still the air heavy, with the scent of cornfields stretching far into the darkness. In the modest white frame house on East 2nd Street, the Moore family settled into sleep. Josiah and Sarah, their 4 children and 2 neighbor girls visiting for the night, filled every bed. The house was quiet now, shutters drawn, doors latched. The gas lamps had been turned low until even their faint glow flickered out. But the silence of the small town did not extend to the shadows within those walls. Somewhere beyond the upstairs hallway, a floorboard creaked, slow, deliberate. The sound was muffled, almost cautious, as though testing how much the old wood would complain under weight. In the stillness, the house seemed to listen, its rooms holding their breath. The figure moved with care, lingering at doorways, watching in silence. Moonlight fell through a crack in the curtains, faintly outlining the head of an axe gripped loosely at its base. Dust motes drifted lazily through the pale beam of light, disturbed only by the shallow breath of someone who should not have been there. Downstairs, a clock ticked faintly, marking the slow passage of minutes. The pendulum's swing seemed louder than usual, echoing in empty spaces as though amplified by the walls themselves. Somewhere outside, an owl called once, then fell silent, as if even nature itself withdrew. Sarah stirred in her sleep, shifting beside Josiah. The faint sound of the bed creaking seemed to ripple down the hallway, a signal that drew the figure closer. Bare feet pressed soundlessly against the boards, every step chosen with care. At the threshold, the figure paused. The lantern in his hand was dark, but faint traces of soot rimmed its glass, as though it had been lit once before, guiding its way into the house hours earlier. The axe gleamed faintly in the moonlight, worn with use but carefully sharpened. The silence deepened until it became unbearable, a weight pressing down on the sleeping family. Shadows bent unnaturally along the walls, stretching and shifting, as if they were no longer bound to the shape of the objects that cast them. Young Herman, the eldest of the Moore children, stirred faintly in his bed. His eyes fluttered open, catching a glimpse of movement in the corner of the room. At first, he thought it a dream, the kind that lingered just before waking. But then he saw the axe and the figure behind it, a shape that did not belong in the safety of home. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The room seemed to swallow his voice, as if the air itself refused to carry a warning. And then silence fell again, deeper, darker, broken only by the steady, unnatural rhythm of breathing in the dark. The night pressed closer, thick and oppressive, as though the house itself had conspired to hold every breath in secret. Herman's eyes widened, the pale glint of the axe hovering above him. For a single frozen heartbeat, he thought of calling for his father. But before sound could form, the shadow shifted forward, swift and deliberate. From the hallway, faint scuffles echoed. Then silence returned just as quickly. The house remained outwardly still. No shouts, no cries, only the whisper of wood settling, disguising the movements of the intruder. It was as though the rooms themselves absorbed the noise, feeding it into their walls, so that no neighbor, no passerby would ever hear. Downstairs, the clock chimed faintly, each note hollow and wrong, ringing into emptiness. Its sound threaded up through the boards, reaching the ears of little Catherine in the guest room. She stirred, clutching her blanket tight. A cold draft passed through, though every window was latched. She turned her face into the pillow eyes, squeezed shut, whispering to herself, as if a prayer might keep the dark at bay. In the master bedroom, Sarah's dreams soured, her breathing quickening, as though her body sensed what her mind could not yet see. A shadow darkened her doorway. The figure paused, watching, head tilting, as if studying the scene with patience, far too calm for the moment. The axe shifted in his hand, heavy yet effortless, like an extension of his arm. The wind outside picked up, brushing the siding with a faint rasp, and with it came another sound so soft it could almost be mistaken for the storm. A low hum, palutruous, tuneless, drifting through the air. Whether the intruder made it or the house itself conjured it, none could tell. It lingered in the rooms, setting every heart to racing, even in sleep. Then came the creak of a chair rocking once in the parlor below. Though no one was there to move it, the rhythm swayed back and forth, slow, steady, like a lullaby gone sour. Victoria, one of the visiting girls, blinked awake. Her small body stiffened as she listened. In the gloom, she thought she saw someone standing at the far corner of the room. A tall shadow, still and formless, yet unmistakably present. Her lips parted to whisper her sister's name, but the figure shifted, sliding silently along the wall, disappearing into the dark, as though it had never been. The farmhouse exhaled a long groan. The smell of iron drifted faintly through the air, metallic and sharp. Upstairs, boards creaked once more, a final sound before everything inside fell utterly, impossibly quiet. In Villisca that night, the moon sank lower behind the clouds. The streets remained silent, and in the small white house on East 2nd Street, the shadows stayed long, patient and unbroken, watching over a silence that would never be spoken of by those who slept within.